What is up, Steelers? How you guys doing, man? Sejam bem-vindos a mais um episódio de fim de semana está a acabar e não sei, não sei como é que vai ser, mas bora ter esperança. Bora ter um bocado de ritmo. All screen. Espero não estar a dar docs a mim próprio. A minha morada é 1, 2, 3, 4. A minha morada é. Oh! Was not bad. Was not bad. Gostava que fosse melhor, mas not bad indeed. Yeah, man. And what are you guys up to today? Peraí, havia um vídeo que eu queria ver. Tem aqui um vídeo para ver. Será que depois tem Just Chatty?
Video has been sponsored by World of Tanks.
Cool.
If you and your team are really good, these
Oh meu Deus, que fixe.
budgets were everywhere. Concepts going from vanilla to the straight up absurd. Like Pepsi Man. Everyone knows Pepsi Man at this point from cultural osmosis, but you may not know Incredible Crisis. A bizarre minigame collection that was definitely a good excuse for a new Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra album. Oh,
Cool,
and yes, I've talked
PlayStation
about Power
stuff.
Shuffle before. It still rules. It's like QWOP with an industrial excavator where sometimes you gotta make curry. 10 out of 10. There's honestly so many places we could start, but why not get the ball rolling with games made by none other than Sony? Sony Computer Entertainment of
Olá.
whatever region published tons of games,
O que andas
so
a fazer
many
no
hits,
YouTube?
but even more forgotten. Nowadays, the amount of first-party Sony AAA games has slowed down
tenho que
big
comprar o
time.
Zelda.
But in the 90s, you'd see something
Olá,
published by Sony Computer Entertainment.
Olá, estás bem disposta? Espero que esteja tudo bem contigo. Eu estou a checar este vídeo. Eu gosto deste gajo, o Austin whatever, Eruption.
Practically every other week.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Sinto
maybe
que sou a
some of
única
those
pessoa
were
que gosta dele, mas, assim posso me sentir especial. E está a falar de jogos da PlayStation. PlayStation é fixe.
like Jim Henson's The Hoops, the video game, and maybe we shouldn't count that, but it does join the ranks of Crash Bandicoot and God of War as first-party releases. This, of course, means there's plenty of forgotten, obscure, and weird Sony PlayStation 1 games left in the dust, some worth mentioning, others... Speaking of, has anyone played
What the fuck
ESPN
is this?
Extreme Games? Definitely taking a hint
No,
from
I did
Sega's
not.
radical 90s, the unfortunate yet weirdly nostalgic Extreme phase of marketing became synonymous with a
Gone
trio
wrong.
of PS1 sports titles. ESPN Extreme Games was a
Mano,
collaboration.
quando eu era puto, isto bate certo, meu. Quando eu era puto, eu sou boomer, estas merdas, desportos radicais estavam. Desportos radicais estavam em voga.
Of different racing events, all inspired by
fuck?
the X Games in '95.
Tem que fazer
These
jogo
things were
assim.
really starting to ramp up in popularity. Predating
jogo de
Tony Hawk's
skate.
Pro Skater by several years, Extreme Games was like a mix of Cruisin' USA and Road Rage. Do a race by any means you
Podia fazer
felt
jogo tipo.
necessary, kick
Podia
dudes
fazer um jogo tipo Ollie Ollie. Porque eu gostei muito do Tony Hawk da Game Boy Color, que era também a primeira vez que eu vi um 2D side-scroller skating game. E foi a primeira vez que eu pensei, uau! Apesar de eu ter jogado Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, que é 3D, tipo, nunca tinha pensado que isto podia funcionar. E o Ollie Ollie funciona bem também. Também é um bom jogo.
down the street and try to finish in first place. It's like someone took Skate or Die seriously. This actually became a franchise though, except they lost the license to ESPN.
Está-se bem, Bita. Toda a gente é bem-vinda. Já que eu com a minha estratégia fantástica de... whatever.
So what do we call it? Extreme Games 2? No, too extreme. Spelled the number 2, letter extreme.
Hey,
It's
that's
more
pretty
the same,
good.
but more extreme, apparently. Oh yeah, we need to reprint the original game as well, as it's getting decent sales, so 1 extreme, then another one, 3 extreme. I don't know how many people looked at these logos in complete earnest and approved it, but good job. By the time the third one came out,
I like it.
published by 989
Come on,
Studios,
man.
it's just more of the same that really doesn't do anything new, looks pretty dated and
I must
ugly,
have
and if
saw
you
some
waited a few
3D
months, you'd
render.
be playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1, a much better game instead.
True.
But at the very least, you can shred hard as a mummy.
Why?
I can't get over 1 extreme. Games like this were just in the States, though. If you pop overseas, there is a ton of forgotten exclusives in both Japanese and PAL regions. The most well-known, and one that's been ported to
Vib Ribbon?
PSP and released as a PlayStation 1 classic, is Vib Ribbon.
I love
a
Vib
rhythm game
Ribbon.
that's really difficult to truly show off.
This game is so cool.
Extremely simple looking and extremely simple to play, and it's really more of a super impressive, bizarre
I don't think it's that simple to play, but I love it.
tech demo than anything else. The game would load itself onto the PS1's RAM, then you would switch it out with a music CD to randomly play generated levels based on waveforms. It's like a proto-audio surf, except
really
one
cool.
made in '99 by the
Vib
developers
Ribbon
of
is really
Parappa the
cool.
Rappa. There are way better examples of this now, but the cuteness of the mascot character, Vibri the Rabbit, definitely stands out.
Yeah,
Little fella's
so
got a
cool.
Vocaloid thing. How about Firebugs, a European-only PlayStation 1 future racing game? A genre that I have a soft spot for, but also
Great
one that
memory
was
of the past.
oversaturated as heck. Firebugs has the art style of like that one Xbox 360 avatar with the kid blowing the bubble gum, except like 10 times worse. This is a look. It feels like a hybrid of Extreme G, but with levels that look like they'd fit into Crash Team Racing. It was developed by Attention to Detail, who were responsible for the Incredible Hulk Pantheon saga with the CGI Hulk feat, but also by people who made Roll Cage, which is a super solid
Roll
racer that's very
Cage.
similar.
Eu lembro de jogar Roll Cage, era mesmo fixe também.
Though I would play that over Firebugs just because it has a PC version and it goes hard. Unfortunately, since Firebugs is PAL and PS1 only and made by a company that's been out of business since 2003, this thing is destined to become lost to time. One of my favorites from this era is a little franchise that started as a launch window title called Jumping Flash. It's a simple concept, you're jumping
Vocês não sabem,
and
mas eu não estou a olhar
platforming, but in
diretamente para o
3D,
monitor.
which, to be fair at the time, was a new
Isso é
concept.
estranho, não é?
The developer, Exact, also known as
Developer.
Excellent Application Create Team, which is a dope name, were tasked with making a mascot for the new era. One that'd stay around as long as any Mario or Sonic. This obviously didn't happen, but Rabbit here definitely deserved it.
It's a
I mean, it's a
fanbase.
cute rabbit mech robot. It's got a rocket booster for a tail. What's not to love? The original Jumping Flash, coming out all the way back in 1995, was actually considered the first platforming game in 3D. When you play it now, nearly 30 years later, you can definitely tell. The concepts are extremely simple, the controls are kind of stiff and at times unforgiving, but no matter which version you're playing, 1 or 2, it's oozing charm. Each level has a simple objective, be it collecting items, blasting dudes away, or defeating bosses. You can jump on people's heads Mario style, and thankfully, Jumping Flash does a thing where it looks down with the camera anytime you're in the air. I can't imagine it not having that with the original PS1 controller being stickless. Considering this predates even Super Mario 64, I think Jumping Flash 1 and 2 hold up as a super quick and fun time. There was actually a third one, the Japanese-only Rabbit Manda, which seems like more or less of the same, but due to having a different developer, things fell a little short. The levels are way smaller, and there's not really any improvements here to really merit a third entry. I think there's an alternate universe where Jumping Flash and Rabbit are top-tier Sony PlayStation mascots. Ones that would become playable in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale and maybe have sequels today. But unfortunately, it was overshadowed pretty heavily by a much more popular 3D platformer a mere year later. One that some might still consider the best one. Jumping Flash may not be totally forgotten, but the further we get away from the PlayStation 1, the more obscure it becomes. And that's a first-party game too. That's kind of like Sony's version of, let's say, Excitebike 64. People know about it, but no one's talking about it these days. In fact, a little bit after Jumping Flash came out, 3D platformers began to flood the market. It didn't matter the console, the mascot animal, or whatever. You couldn't go 2 steps without seeing one of these on the corner. There were so many companies trying to cash in on the craze of this burgeoning genre that, of course, a lot of them are going to be lost to time. For, say, example, Jersey Devil, which might be okay. Jersey Devil, the first game by the developer of Dead by Daylight. No,
Okay.
seriously. Jersey Devil in its hard-to-see cover that's like 65% pure darkness is a 3D platformer in a massive sea of them. You go level to level, smacking dudes around, solving little small baby puzzles, and doing your best to stop the evil Dr. Narf from taking over the world with vegetables. Pesky little pumpkins. So, Jersey Devil is actually a cryptid based in ancient Philly and New Jersey and folklore, a fantastic bipedal creature with hooves that's also kinda kangaroo and wyvern-ish, and yes, people actually thought this was a real thing.
You have to go out there. You have to do it.
However, you toss that into a video game format and you got yourself a cartoon devil cosplaying as Batman. One with a ridiculously long intro that's like Tex Avery discovered sprite art. Seriously, it actually looks pretty good, high budget even. It's just when you start playing around that you realize it feels extremely paint by numbers. Coming out in late 1997, there were already tons of other 3D platformers that did what it did better, and it seems to be more of a timing thing. With these types of games, you want to have a loud personality, but Jersey Devil seems a little at ends with itself. It has goofy cartoon sound effects and a silly presentation with the villain whose name sounds like something Pinky shouts out. But then a lot of the music doesn't seem to fit in and instead goes the Batman animated series direction. By no means bad.
Why?
There's actually a lot of great pieces. It's just a little dissonant from the gameplay.
True.
If you dig through the PlayStation 1's library, you're gonna see a lot of this. Games tossed out wanting to take the mascot world by storm, but ultimately failing. In those mascot wars, not everyone could be Crash Bandicoot or Spyro the Dragon, but at the same time, not everyone can be a Taifu, Wrath of the Tiger. DreamWorks Interactive made a lot of cool stuff, but they only made one Taifu, a cool anthropomorphic tiger man wearing Tai Chi capris who goes level to level beating the daylights out of anything he sees. You study the ways of Tiger style, Mantis style, and others in order to do cool combos and knock everyone dead. It's nothing too complicated. You're not going to be needing to memorize Virtua Fighter combos at every single of the levels, but it's definitely a simple and fun experience for an afternoon. I like this one, but weirdly, it didn't get good reviews at all. And I think part of that is due to its length and unoriginality. Considering a majority of these PS1 titles are indeed forgotten and hard to obtain, it's easier to look more fondly on something that might be only like 3 hours long, especially when it only takes a few clicks on a few weird websites. While we're on the topic of anthropomorphic bipedal orange creatures, we got a Kingsley's Adventure, a game that if you haven't played, seen, or ever heard of, I don't blame you. I mean, the Wikipedia page literally says, upon release, it generated little attention and went unnoticed. Sucks for them, but perfect for us. Developed and published by Psygnosis, the first of many of these in the video, Kingsley is a 3D platformer that takes a bit more inspiration from Legend of Zelda than, say, the Italian Plumber. And if you look at the screen at all, it's pretty obvious. Kingsley is a cute little knight, one who wants to become a, quote, true knight, whatever that means, and in order to do so, he's got to run around and do good guy things. It's your standard action platformer from the time, but unfortunately one with some pretty gnarly tank controls. I think as a whole, this control scheme has a time and a place. It works with Resident Evil, but maybe when you're tossed difficult platforming challenges with death pits everywhere, maybe don't. Besides that, Kingsley oozes charm. It's got a fun soundtrack, and the combat feels good enough. It's got that PS1 fog, but considering it's tossing you into big open world environments to explore and do puzzles in, I totally get it. While Ocarina of Time may have come out the previous year, and more importantly, Mystical Ninja starring Goemon even earlier, the standard was set for this genre of open world dungeon exploring games. But you really didn't see many of these on the PlayStation 1, and Kingsley's a pretty decent flavor of that. It's just got chronic tank controls and a platformer syndrome, which does suck. I think this one's a bit of a hidden gem these days, and totally worth playing by whatever means you can. I'm just glad to find out that Tunic has a prequel.
Crepe de chocolate e não devia.
Every generation of video games has like a main character genre. Does that make sense? Like with the 7th gen, it was kind of when first-person shooters were really taking off, and that was pretty much all over the place. And with the PlayStation 1, it was kind of a mix between like platformers and JRPGs, and we'll get to the latter later, but for now we need to talk about a genre that's been around as long as video games itself: licensed games. Is that a genre? Not really. And when we shifted into the third dimension, licensed games were
Licensed games as in genre, isso é interessante. Eu diria que é equivalente a pop, mas não é bem. Mas uma semelhança seria o género que os licensed games vai adotar vai ser o género mais popular no momento. Diria que essa é a semelhança com o pop.
Everywhere. In fact, you didn't even need to be based off an IP anymore. You could just be a person. Like VIP, starring Pamela Anderson. The game's so good, it'll make your Time Crisis cabinet sweat. The only thing missing here is the dual-wield power squat from Fear Effect. Around this time, celebrities would begin attaching their names to games left and right, especially if some skeezy suit told them they can make an easy 6 figures with 3 days of work.
I gotta play this
Some
game.
cared a lot more than others. Others would be like Shaq Fu. But the game from the PlayStation 1 that stands out the most to me is a little something called Apocalypse. Prior to teaming up with Tony Hawk to create the childhood for tens of thousands of sky-loving preteens, Neversoft would hit up Bruce Willis to make Apocalypse. The same year as the film Armageddon, actually, proving that old Willis was part of the Doomer Club. Imagine, if you will, one part Diablo, one part Robotron 2084, a little side of cheesy one-liners, and you got yourself Apocalypse. A game for the longest time I didn't get, which was a mistake. With no exaggeration, you shoot your way into hell through all of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all while controlling a dude named Trey, who says things like,
"Well, dip me in shit and roll me in cracker crumbs. This freaking cheese wheel. Strap one on, it's time to jam."
Maybe it's the same part of me that loves playing crappy or B-tier games from time to time, but Apocalypse freaking rules, and it's weirdly seen in a negative light. It's dumb as heck, it knows it, and it's hard to ask anything more from a game that, in all honesty, should have been the Contra titles from this era. Seriously, put this side by side with Legacy of War or see the Contra adventure, and it's night and day. I'm just glad to know that prior to being put in the Activision sequel mines, that Neversoft was putting out bangers. Speaking of Spider-Man, a lot of people know Spider-Man video games for the newer ones or the licensed sequel movie on the PlayStation 2 where you deliver the pizzas. But prior to revolutionizing web swinging, Neversoft gave us Spider-Man on the PS1 and Nintendo 64, one where you'd swing across infinite horizons.
That was cool.
Kinda loved it. However, this actually got a PlayStation 1 exclusive sequel made by Vicarious Visions, one that was never ported and had to be reprinted with different content. Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro, a direct sequel, one that tosses the Spooderman directly into another conflict with a peanut gallery of different villains, all revolving around Electro. The main difference here is the introduction of ground levels, as the first entry mainly takes place on rooftops or in indoor areas. I mean, really, it's just more of the same, but that's a good same. I think at the time, people wanted it to be a bigger leap than it was, especially because the PlayStation 2 is already out and impressing for nearly a year. Why play Spider-Man 2 when you could be playing Evergrace? This thing definitely had its own issues though, as it featured a big dramatic battle on top of 2 large towers that resembled the Twin Towers, and it released in October 2001. So they reprinted the thing, edited the cutscene, and added a bridge between the two to make it a little different. I think that overall, Enter Electro is a pretty fun time, and even though it's not as fantastic as the original, holds its own ground. I'm just glad that Spider-Man's out here doing good work and censoring bad words for the kids.
Kid mode!
There are honestly hundreds of licensed PlayStation 1 games we could talk about, and many I already have. I mean, there's the Fantastic Four beat 'em up that sucks. There's countless Disney tie-ins like Lilo and Stitch. Don't forget 007 Racing or the super cool Ghost in the Shell game made by the same team as Jumping Flash. This entire video could just be about licensed games, so for now, let's move on. After I say this, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is incredible and they really should have ported this instead of All-Star Battle. Okay, bye. They can't all be zingers though. In fact, the majority of the time when a game becomes forgotten, it's because it's awful, not great, reprehensible, vile, or in a lot of cases, just not very good. It's also not one of my videos without digging through the literal dumpster, so here we go. Punky Skunk. Yes, I own this. Punky Skunk should have been alright.
Even the title sounds terrible.
But you can definitely tell this was originally going to be a Super Nintendo game. Developed by the Japanese Ukiyote, Punky Skunk, also known as Coolie Skunk, seems to be a super ambitious title that gave you a ton of different unique power-ups, so that there would be a lot of variety in each stage. There's pogo sticks, parachutes, snowboards, and also a ton of mini-games between the levels to spice up the gameplay. It's just, for some reason, the actual moment-to-moment feeling is just So slow. Punky just kind of trods along, and there's barely any momentum to, well, playing. Punky Skunk is the definition of a run-of-the-mill platformer, and you can absolutely tell it was a little low on ideas once they got the base concepts down. I think some of that is due to the unreleased version of the game that was in development for a long time on the Super Famicom. It's been leaked, so now you can see how it played, but no matter which version, Punky Skunk is an aggressively mediocre time that's gonna grate on your nerves.
Aggressively?
Why? He makes this noise. Every single time. In 2003, Sony would be several years into the PlayStation 2's lifespan, but they would put out one more exclusive for the PS1, one that was specifically in PAL regions, so I bet only a few of you have ever heard of Jinx. 2003, huh? The same year as Jack 2, WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain, and Silent Hill 3. Well, if you weren't lucky enough to own a next-gen console 3 years in, also lived in Europe, you could get yourself a Jinx for the PlayStation.
What the fuck? Wait. Okay.
1. Rather than controlling a cute or cool character, you assume control of a freaking court jester, one pogging out on the cover. It's about as run-of-the-mill and as bland of a platformer as you can make. It doesn't do anything special, it doesn't have any super interesting gameplay hook, and practically no presence on the internet. I couldn't even find a proper long play to look at gameplay with, and like, that's saying something. It controls poorly, the platforming is a fight against the camera, and it does nothing that makes it stand out amongst the crowd. In fact, visually, Jinx kind of goes in the same direction as Spyro the Dragon. There's a lot of similar color schemes. Honestly, it does have some nice looking areas, and some of the music is pretty decent, but if you're not in the mood for a, well, medieval jester, castle, big bouncy kind of vibe, yeah, you're gonna hate it. I know I did, especially when the same small loop plays for multiple stages. But when you could already be playing, say, Super Mario Sunshine, or more to the point, the entire plethora of fantastic PS1 platformers, Jinx falls incredibly short. At its best, Jinx is inoffensive. At its worst, it's an argument against video games as an art form. I also just kind of hate the way he looks. Is that too mean? Anyways, who here likes Persona? No, I'm not gonna mention Persona Revelations here, even though I should, but long before Atlas joined up with Sega, they used to publish their own games, and boy, they would publish some weird stuff. I think I'm like one of 10 people who actually played God Mode, but today I'm here to bring you the good word. Eggs of Steel Charlie's Excellent Adventure. No, I did not stutter.
That was pretty close. Whoop. Hey, all right. Donuts, my favorite.
I'm like 80% positive this voiceover is just ad-libbed. Eggs of Steel, also known as Hello Charlie, is a time. Developed by Rhythm and Hughes of all people. Yeah, the animation studio that did VFX for Game of Thrones and Alvin and the Chipmunks. Eggs of Steel plays like an early DOS title, but it also kind of looks like malware. Credit to my friend Aiden for that joke. Thank you, Aiden.
I'm so
you go
confused.
around each level collecting coins, hitting levers, and trying not to die. This thing is an audio nightmare. There's so many awful clipped sound effects and single lines that play over and over. Want to hear the Eggman laugh every time you pick up a coin? Here you go. Although if you die, be prepared to watch one of the most gruesome, horribly gory death sequences this side of Mortal Kombat.
Oh my God.
For what it is, it's not completely awful, but more to the point, why? Who is Eggs of Steel for? Why did Atlas, the developer of Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, bring this stateside? There's a lot of mysteries here, and perhaps someday someone will find the answers, but that ain't gonna be me. So instead, you can watch this.
Bugigangas. Sério, estou a ver outras coisas.
There's a seemingly endless amount of terrible PlayStation 1 games out there, as that leap to 3D was kind of hard for a lot of people, but they're not all bad. Since we're not going to have time to cover everything, I figured why not have ourselves a little bit of an old-fashioned lightning round. Let's go. You ever play Team Buddies? Doubt it. Coming in halfway between Worms and General Chaos, my favorite stupid Genesis game, Team Buddies has you engaging in small-scale war for cubes. You run around with your team, putting these things together to make tanks to hopefully defeat the enemy team. An incredibly simple concept, but one that kind of hangs around battle tanks is one of those dumb video games that I enjoyed playing as a kid for several hours because I was incredibly simple. And thankfully, I still am. Speaking of simple, there shouldn't be much going on with a caveman, but Art Dink's Tale of the Sun is absolutely bizarre. Also known as Taiyo no Shippo, Wild Pure Simple Life, Tale of the Sun is a caveman simulator that is ultimately closer to an art experiment than an actual video game. You do caveman things, eat meat, smack dinosaurs around, and try to build a village. Playing this without any kind of guide in 2023 is a fool's task, but one that has momentum and speed that'll make Sonic the Hedgehog jealous. There's a lot of bizarre PlayStation 1 titles out there, but only Tale of the Sun has you randomly fall asleep at any time. Its soundtrack is also wild. Then you've got Running Wild, from the producers of Crash Bandicoot. Naughty Dog, no. But 989 Studios once again out here with a ridiculous concept. Y'all know Mad Dash on the Xbox? Well, imagine that, but made around the same time as Sonic R. In fact, just imagine Sonic R, but with that signature PlayStation anthropomorphic 90s extreme nonsense, and there you go. Don't you just love these character models? They're so sexy. Running Wild is kind of fun, actually, but it's also one of the fartiest sounding games you'll ever play. Anytime you hit a boost pad, it does a little... So the whole thing isn't very pleasant to listen to. Despite being actually fun to play and experience, there's barely any content, only 6 stages, so you'll be through with pretty much everything in like an hour, which for a racing game is not good. Speaking of not good, how about Steel Harbinger? Brought to you by Mindscape, the people behind Lego Island of all things, is FMVs. Steel Harbinger is one of those early PlayStation 1 titles that's a mix of 2D and 3D. The gameplay is totally middle of the road, and just go play Apocalypse instead. However, you can't hate on those cutscenes.
Report this story to you as long as it is physically possible.
Don't forget about Blade Roar 1 and 2, dope furry fighting games that are based, and that's it. That's all you need. Lastly, and I'm sure a few of y'all were really hoping I'd bring these up, but there's nothing more hidden gem from Capcom in this era than the Mega Man Legends series. Everything about the way they look is incredibly cozy, nostalgic, and it just breathes life into me. Sure, they're a little janky with their tank control schemes now, but the fact that Capcom's practically ported everything Rockman related besides these is a shame. I think the real forgotten gem's gotta be the Misadventures of Tronbon, a spin-off of a spin-off. Misadventures follows the goofy, sometimes antagonist Tronbon doing borderline crimes with her army of servobots, and while it's totally different than Legends, it's just the kind of thing I love playing. There's multiple styles of gameplay, and I sure love random minigames being tossed in for the sake of variety. Not even joking, I love it. But good luck finding a copy of this under $500. Woohoo!
Huh? 1 million zenny?
I got one more hidden gem to talk about, but first I need to introduce something different. You know what was around all over in the 90s but has practically fallen off the planet? Light guns. Pop, pop. Not unless you count things like the Wii Zapper or whatever the heck Cabela's has on the Switch. You've seen light guns in all shapes and forms, be they revolvers, weird future guns, or whatever the heck this was. But now that we have HD televisions, the necessary technology to make these work isn't being used. I mean, even if you have a backwards compatible PlayStation 3 and the games, those old light guns simply won't work without a CRT. So all of these games are practically left in the dust, unless you want to play in controller mode, which you don't. The PlayStation 1 had the Gun Con, and this thing was awesome. This is how you played Time Crisis, Resident Evil Survivor, and Die Hard Trilogy 2. There's only a handful of releases for this thing, and it was the closest that we were gonna get to that arcade gun game experience. I always liked playing it in the arcade, but Point Blank was a really cool collection of minigames that tested your speed and reflexes. It does definitely lose a lot of luster when you play it with a controller. While there is fun to be had with friends and, you know, the novelty, a majority of these light gun games are incredibly mid. But there's only one elemental gear bolt, and it is frankly absurd. This thing is peak late 90s anime. You've got women with massive shoulder pads, Sentai style mecha, gross monster designs, and a totally incomprehensible story. Elemental Gear Bolt is a light gun title that uses, well, elements in order to tackle enemies. You've got fire, lightning, water, and you'll switch between them to be efficient. The English version of this game is way more difficult because of some weird localization choices by Working Designs, but even so, it's a fun and totally underrated time that I think was totally passed over. I love the visual style of mixing 2D and 3D elements, as well as the magical crystal look of a lot of the interface. I don't think anyone really expects much out of a light gun game's narrative. However, developer Alpha System went out of their way to create something bizarre. A lot of the actual story and world building doesn't make any sense until after you finish, where you see a lot of stuff get unveiled in the credits. You even unlock a libraries menu, which is essentially a dictionary after finishing, so if you feel like holding on to to a gun con while reading deep lore paragraphs, you can. I think Elemental Gearbolt is pretty rad, but it's gonna be totally forgotten due to being like 3 layers of niche. You not only had to own a rare PlayStation 1 game, one that goes for a few hundred now, but also a PlayStation 1, a gun con, a CRT television, the space to do so, and also be a 90s anime nerd. Most of these things get you on the receiving end of a swirly in high school. It's not perfect, but Elemental Gearbolt is a total hidden gem that deserves more. I would love to see a classic light gun collection on the Switch with the Joy-Cons, or even some kind of spiritual successor in VR, but for now, emulation with a mouse is probably going to be your only option. That is, unless you are lucky enough to win Working Design's contest for the Gold Gun Con and Assassin's Case, a piece so rare it's technically the most expensive PlayStation 1 game. One that came with a warning for
Começa a achar
people
que vou
with
para a cama
sweaty
depois do vídeo
hands.
acabar.
I actually don't have sweaty hands, so if anyone out there has
Mentira.
a spare Assassin's Case, hit me up. I'm sure there's plenty of you out there. And since we're talking about Japanese games, y'all didn't think I was gonna forget about JRPGs, did you? Like I said earlier, pretty much every generation of games has a main character genre, and the PlayStation ones was definitely JRPGs. You would see these things everywhere. Nowadays, it seems like people see turn-based RPGs
What does it mean by main character genre?
in a much lesser light. I'm not really
fuck
sure
does
why.
that mean?
Maybe I'm just an old man who likes turn-based video games, but with that mentality, you're missing out on things like Midnight Suns, Persona, or even the new Yakuza series. Maybe it's just because I grew up with them, but to me, there's really nothing like an old-school Japanese RPG. The fact that Squaresoft, the premier developer of these things, has its own hidden gems from the era really says everything. For example, Vagrant Story. Despite being a big flagship title from Square back in the day, one that was easily one of the most visually gorgeous things I'd seen, it's such a weird feeling game that it almost feels like an experiment. Having turn-based combat where you target individual limbs is strange enough, but they definitely put a lot of faith in the player to understand complicated systems. I love it, but I wouldn't give it to my normie friends, which kind of says it all. Fantastic experience though. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, not including the hundreds of titles that never got localized, like Twin Bee RPG, which I just found out exists. There honestly simply wasn't enough time to digest these back in the day. All of these PlayStation 1 JRPGs were like 30 to 70 hours long, usually with a ton of combat and dialogue practically designed to get as much bang for your buck as possible. Like, if you were calculating the dollar per hour versus cost, you'd be making a killing on most of these compared to Taifu. Some forgotten standouts, of course, are like Suikoden 1 and 2, which are now thankfully being remastered. I guess I begged enough. Sony's first-party Legend of Dragoon comes up a lot, as well as Kodelka, Lunar 1 and 2, Arc the Lad Collection. I was really into Wild Arms 2 back in the day, and Breath of Fire 3 and 4 are practically staples of my childhood. Each of these little adventures were shoved onto one,
Achei Breath of Fire 3, acho eu, e gostei muito.
sometimes 3 or 4 discs, and even
Na
with
PSP.
out the big Final Fantasy name, you'd still have plenty of fun. Sadly, as it stands, with the exception of being a digital PlayStation 1 classic on the PS3 store, a majority of these have never been ported, are in licensing hell, and just haven't seen a re-release since the 90s. As much as I would love to kick back on my TV with Thousand Arms, it doesn't seem like that's ever gonna happen. And unless you want to fork over 150 plus, the high season is.
Sorry,
But if I
estou a
had to
ficar com
narrow
sono.
everything down to just one game to talk about from the genre, it would probably be one from the aforementioned Working Designs. One of my favorite games on the entire console is the original Alundra, and it's a shame a lot more people don't know about this. Alundra is the very rare 2D game in an era where SCEA wasn't wanting those to be localized. This was actually the first title by Matrix Software, the people who would make the 3D ports of Final Fantasy 4 and 3, as well as the extremely popular Groove Coaster. But before all of that,
Why did he say 4 and 3?
they created the classic Legend of Zelda
Weird.
clone, Alundra, a dark fantasy adventure about a young elf-looking guy who has the ability to enter people's dreams. On first appearance, this may seem generic and simple. You move Alundra around a map that has the same overworld feeling as any Link to the Past or something similar. You gradually unlock items and upgrades to earn access to new areas, there's weapons that'll help you take out enemies faster, and find hearts to make your numbers go up, although you do have the ability to freely jump, which automatically makes it the better game. Sorry. I don't make the rules. The story goes to a lot of dark
Wait
places.
a minute. Eu acho que já vi este vídeo.
dealing with issues like depression, religion,
Wait a
and even
minute.
death. Lots of death. It's heavy. However, since Working Designs was responsible for localizing this, there's a lot of, well, interesting choices in dialogue. You have all these sad moments happening and characters dying off, and then suddenly a guy named Bonaire, who they decided looked like an 80s surfer guy, decides to talk like an 80s surfer guy. The faith of a few and a little weed is all we need, bro. I don't even have anything to say. They also tweaked a lot of aspects of the difficulty, making all enemies spongy as heck and causing you to have to hit a basic dude like 6 times in the corner before it dies. But thankfully, you can still get that unworking designs version, you feel? Still, Alundra got its cult status and legacy with the original release, and it's a solid adventure start to finish. It can be a little confusing knowing where to go at times, but before you know it, you'll be hopping between dreams, embracing everything about the bomb, and trying to save the village of Inoa and eventually the world. It's a standalone title that has stood the test of time, does deserve your attention, but unfortunately seems like it's slowly being forgotten. There is also a sequel, Alundra 2, this time published by Activision. This one's even more obscure, but it's also one of the most disappointing sequels I've ever played. It barely has anything in common with the original and is a
Yikes.
total 180 in a lot of regards. Apparently, the developer set out on a mission to make the world more comical to appeal to a wider audience, as the original was too depressing with, quote, too many people dying, which apparently translates to
Looks floaty as fuck.
this.
Fell in love with a man, and I know he loves me, but a pirate and
There are a ton of forgotten Japanese role-playing games, action
Okay,
RPGs, and
that's
heck,
cool.
games all over the PlayStation 1. The library is just too massive. But if I had to recommend one game for you to play, it would be the original Alundra. I'll talk about the sequel one day, but that is not this day. And so, there you have it. More forgotten and weird PlayStation 1 games than you can shake a stick at. The library of this console is just so massive that, of course, there's gonna be a lot of stuff that I totally whiffed on. Like, I almost forgot about Jinx, but to be fair, we should all forget about Jinx or force our friends to play it. Either works. If there's an oddity you think I should take a look at, please let me know down in the comments, and I'm sure I'll find a way to fit it into a video in the future, because I love finding stuff that is just totally ridiculous. Why? Well, uncovering stuff that, like Kingsley's Adventure, quote, generated little interest is something that is really appealing.
Thanks, son.
I don't know, maybe I'm just a freak. Also, go play Power Shovel, seriously. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by visiting the Patreon and pledging there, or just buying one of my t-shirts on the Pixel Empire. Everything goes back into the channel, and now that we're in 2023, I plan to keep the ball rolling. Thank you guys so much. Anyways, I've been Austin, and catch me next time when maybe we check out a few more celebrities. Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Aaron Kwolek, Blackfoot Ferret, Cheeks, Chris
Doesn't
Shelton,
like you,
Doug
subscribe.
Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nick Irving,
Thank you, thank you. Will this work? I don't think this will work properly. Uma coisa que eu queria fazer. Ah, já está. Os tuileres. Man, my head. have no idea what. I don't use grenades. I don't use items. As usual. As usual, I don't do the things that you're supposed to do. What's the button? Quero fazer contra isso, ó gajo. Ele está aqui. Oh, ele deu-me um contra. Eu estava distraído. Não, não estava nada. Estava... Não tinha percebido que não tinha os coisas equipados. Não, este aqui é o botão... Não sei qual é o botão de ataque sequer. Olha que eu sou dançarino. É para abrir? Não.
No! Why pick on a frail little woman? I've always been loyal to the king. Oh, yes, as God is my witness. I'll do anything you ask.
I have no intention of harming you. The royal automats are my only enemies.
Partout les saints! You were sent by heaven above.
Oh, wait, but what?
Have you watched these machines?
Yes, I had a front row seat. A swarm of ferocious beasts who cleared the way for a creature right out of a nightmare. It was the Grim Reaper, madame. Death itself. Nothing and no one was spared. I was spellbound and horrified by its dance of death. If by misfortune you find yourself in its presence, do not let it leap in your direction. Those who suffered its lightning attack did not survive. None of them, without
Lightning attack.
exception. Come now, if you claim to want to destroy these automats, it's time to get going. You must stop them from advancing.
É que está a ter dificuldades. Não, botou errado outra vez. Ai, que esta área sofre muito. Eu não acredito que este jogo tenha um pause. Ah. Acho que vou descansar. Vou jogar isto offline.